And the solution for the problems that humanity currently faces is indeed a raising of consciousness. Consciousness must be raised on a global scale. But to do that, the way that that is done is by raising it on an individual scale. Within each individual, consciousness must be raised. And as each individual consciousness is raised, global consciousness is raised. But in talking about consciousness and why this is the solution to all of the problems that humanity faces, most people don't really understand what consciousness is. They think of it as simply being physically awake. Yes, we have physical awake consciousness because we're awake, we're alert, but consciousness is much more than just a state of being physically awake. So we need a definition for consciousness as we go forward in the presentation. And I'd like to encapsulate how I feel about consciousness. This is a quote that is on the oracle at Delphi in Greece. This is words that are inscribed upon the Delphic oracle. Heed these words, you who wish to probe the depths of nature. If you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither will you find it outside. If you ignore the wonders of your own house, how do you expect to find other wonders? In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. Know thyself, and you will know the universe and the gods. So this is one of my favorite quotes because it tells the whole story, essentially. We need to know ourselves. All knowledge of value ultimately is self-knowledge. And this is what we lack globally. We lack this as an entire species. And this is why we're in so much trouble today. This is why we're in the dark situation that we're in. Because we lack self-knowledge. We need to understand ourselves and our motivations and our desires and what makes us tick if we're really going to have any kind of happiness, success, or peace in our lives. And the ancients understood this, and they encapsulated it perfectly in a statement like that and in the buildings and in the architecture that they put together. Perhaps they were more connected with consciousness and with their own self-knowledge than we are today. So this next slide is a dictionary definition of what consciousness is. An encyclopedia or a dictionary says that consciousness is the characteristics of a being generally regarded to comprise qualities such as subjectivity, self-awareness, sentience, sapience, and the ability to perceive the relationship between oneself and one's environment. Now that's an excellent definition of what consciousness is in my estimation, but it's a bit complex. There's a lot of words there. And instead of going into each word and breaking it down and defining it separately, we can take that as a pretty good definition of what consciousness is, but for the purposes of this presentation, I would like to just simplify it and take it down to a simpler level. So with that in mind, this is the definition of consciousness that I'm going to use going forward in this presentation. Consciousness is simply the ability of a being to recognize patterns and meaning with respect to events taking place, both within oneself and in the realm in which the self exists and operates. In other words, consciousness is the ability to understand information, understand events that are taking place, the implications of them, and internal events and information as well as external worldly events and information. It is the ability to recognize patterns within information. That's my definition of consciousness as I'm using it in this presentation, so we want to keep that in mind as we move forward. The ancients had different symbols that they used for consciousness and energy, and this is one of them. This is called the Tao. Some may know it as the yin and the yang. And this represented the all, everything, because everything is conscious. Everything is consciousness ultimately. It's all energy. And there are different mixtures of different types of energies. And the Taoist philosophy codified this in this symbol, the Tao, the yin-yang, by a mixture of two basic polar energies. One being light, one being dark. One being male, one being female. They call these the yin and yang. Now, yang is on the left there, and it's solar. It has to do with light, the sun. It's masculine in its qualities. It's active. It's more analytical, and it's a dominant energy. It's more left brain. We're going to talk about the structure of the brain later on, and it can be aggressive. It's dominant. It's active. It's a male thrusting principle. Okay, the darker energy, yin, is associated with the moon, which is up at night. Okay, when it's dark. It's a more feminine or passive energy. It relates more with intuition than with analytical thought or logic. It's more submissive than dominant. It's more right-brained. And it deals with concepts of compassion and nurturing. So the ancients looked at this as these are the qualities that are in all of us. Not just men and women. It's not just male or female. This masculine and feminine energy is indwelling in all of us, whether we are male or female. And we have to strike a blend, a perfect blend, or an equilibrium of these two types of energies, male and female, yang and yin. So what we're going to talk about later is how one of these energies is really seemingly dominating the other more in the modern world. Another mode or another symbol that the ancients used to explain what consciousness was is the triangle, because they recognized that consciousness was a threefold aspect within an individual. Basically, an individual expresses their consciousness in three basic ways. And all other ways that they express themselves are offshoots or variants of these three basic modalities of consciousness. So in the ancient world, this was known as the law of three, or the triune aspect of the individual. And here's what they are: our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. See, our thoughts are the creator of our experience. Everything that exists has to first exist as a thought to come into manifestation. So our thoughts can be seen as the creator God, the creator of our experience. So I have it labeled here, the Father of the Trinity of thought, emotion, and action. And thoughts arise from what we call mind. The second part is our emotions. This is the yin aspect of consciousness. Okay, so the thoughts are the holistic quality. It's the essence. Emotions are the yin aspect. This is the feminine aspect of consciousness. This is the spirit in which we do things, our emotions. So this is the sacred feminine, or the mother of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, if you will. Okay? This is the internalized expression of our consciousness, how we feel. And then there's the male aspect, what we do. So we have a thought, we feel a certain way about it, and then we take action in the world in relation to our thoughts and emotions. So our actions are the third aspect of our consciousness. And we perform actions with the body. And since it's a male principle, this is the yang energy, it's considered the offspring of our thoughts and our emotions. So it is the child of the father and the mother. And it's a male principle, so it's a male child, the son. So this could be seen as the divine child of the Trinity. Thoughts being the creator God, the emotions being the sacred feminine mother, and then our actions being the male offspring of those two, the divine male child, the Son. Now, we talked about consciousness and how it's correlated to the brain, the yin and yang energies, the left and right hemisphere of the neocortex, the human brain. Okay? And what I want to talk about now is what happens when one of these hemispheres is completely dominant over the other. How does the whole brain begin to function when that happens? Well, the neocortex, the whole upper brain, the whole human brain is like the executive controller. It's the command center of the whole three sub-brain complexes. Remember, you have the neocortex up at the top of the head, the new brain, the new cortex, neo meaning new. You have the limbic brain in the middle, it's the midbrain, the mammal brain. And then at the base of the brain, you have the brain stem and the cerebellum, which is called the R complex, the reptile brain. So the neocortex, the top brain, okay, is like the CEO of the company. Let's look at it that way. He's the person that makes the executive decisions of the company. Now, if that part of the brain gets sick, or if it isn't working properly, then the command functions of the whole brain complex, the three parts of the brain, have to be shunted to one of the other two brain complexes. So the executive functions are either going to go to the limbic brain, the midbrain, the mammal brain, or they're going to go to the lower brain, the R complex. So here's how this imbalance works. Here you see the three complexes of the brain. The neocortex, the limbic brain, and the R complex, or the reptile brain. If we become extremely imbalanced to the left brain hemisphere, and this is how most people become imbalanced. There is a percentage that become very right brain imbalanced, but there is more of a tendency to become left brain imbalanced because of how our educational system is here in the Western Hemisphere. The left brain becomes dominant, and what happens is the whole neocortex starts to not function properly, and this is the part of the brain that starts to shut down, the limbic brain. See, our emotions are more cultivated through a holistic cohesiveness of both brain hemispheres, particularly when we start to get in touch with our right brain hemisphere. Okay? When you're only in the left, there's very little emotional or intuitive makeup within the person. So their limbic system actually begins to shut down. Their whole neocortex isn't functioning properly because of that imbalance. So the part of the brain that takes over is the reptile brain, the R complex. And the person begins behaving in reptile-like ways, controlling, dominating, hoarding, greed, external control over others. And we see this everywhere in our culture because these people's brains are in such a state of imbalance, in such a state of neurochemically, they're not operating properly. And the limbic brain has stopped functioning. The person is essentially cut off from their emotional guidance system of how they feel about what they do to others, and they become like a reptile because they're being ruled by the reptile brain. And they become cold-blooded. They don't care about what they're doing to anyone else. It's all about me. And it doesn't make a difference who I have to step on. That's what a person is thinking who is ruled by the reptile brain. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Doesn't matter. It's only about how it relates to me. Now, the opposite of this is if the right brain becomes imbalanced, okay, which is more of a rarity, but it does happen, then the person, the neocortex shuts down again. They're not completely, but it's not really functioning in the way it's intended as the executive the executive functions of the brain. And in this case, the person loses a lot of connection with the R complex of the brain. So they don't care about anything going on in the physical world. It doesn't matter if I'm living in a state of physical disarray. It doesn't matter if I, have none of the basic necessities for survival. It doesn't matter if I'm being controlled externally from other people and my rights are being taken away or I'm being physically abused. See, because in that case, the mammalian brain, the limbic brain, has gone kind of haywire, and this person's being ruled by their emotional brain. They don't have enough of the male tendencies because the feminine part of the brain has overtaken their consciousness, and this person, their limbic system becomes the executive controller of the brain, and they lose all connection with survival instincts and anything having to do with living in the physical world. So somebody who's extremely imbalanced in religion or the New Age movement, perhaps, excessively meditating, let's say, this could be a way that the brain is imbalanced to the right hemisphere, and then the person becomes ruled by the limbic brain, the mammalian brain. And ultimately, that's what is really going on. We have people's brains being imbalanced and really being put into a state of extreme unhealthiness through imbalance toward one brain hemisphere or another. Because when we get imbalanced toward the left brain, we become ruled by the R complex and we become dominators, masters. Okay? When we're ruled by the right brain, then we lose all connection with physical survival and don't care what happens to us anymore. We become ruled by our emotions, and we become like slaves. So this is why this brain imbalance is really occurring. There's a force out there that wants to create a world of masters and slaves, ultimately. They want the brain so imbalanced, it wants the brain so imbalanced that there's some people who are so left brain imbalanced they become dominating controllers, and some that become right brain imbalanced and they're willing to capitulate to any form of control that is thrust upon them. And ultimately, there's a little of both kinds of imbalance in most people, and they become like a master and a slave simultaneously. They want to rule over whoever they can below them, and then they'll take orders from whoever is above them in this hierarchy of control. So this is an actual brain scan taken from a science journal of what the brain looks like when it becomes heavily imbalanced. This isn't physical holes in the brain over here. These are areas of electrochemical deadness. So there's no neural firing in the black parts of the brain, the real dark areas. This person's brain that's labeled normal here, it's a bit difficult to see on this slide, but this person's brain is in what's called global EEG coherence. Global brain coherence. The electrochemical activity is distributed equally about both hemispheres of the neocortex. You're looking at the neocortex from underneath, this being the top of the brain here. So this is the front of the head, that's the back of the head. Okay? So that would make this the left brain hemisphere and this the right brain hemisphere, if you could visualize that. So look, picture it as if you're taking the brain and lifting it up like this. Here's my left side of my brain. I'm lifting it up like this. You're seeing it from underneath. So that's the left brain hemisphere. That's the right brain hemisphere. I'm sorry, it's backwards. This is the left brain hemisphere here, the left brain on that side, and that's the right. So if you tilted this down this way, that would be the front of the head. Okay? Now, here, the brain is labeled violent because I'll tell you about the person, the types of individuals that were scanned for these two images. This person was not given a standard Western educational upbringing, did not watch a lot of television, did not eat a Western diet, meditated a small amount on a daily basis, and they have global EEG coherence. This person was brought up in a Western educational system. They watched many hours of television a day, didn't really do a lot of reading, never meditated, ate a very Western fast food type diet, and that's what their brain ended up looking like. You can see that really the real damaged part, the real electrically dead part of the brain is right there on the right hemisphere. See? Because they became like a controller, and it's labeled violent. This person had violent tendencies and had problems, behavioral issues, and possibly, I'm not sure if it ended up in problems with, law, but that's what a left brain imbalanced neocortex ends up looking like. That person became very heavily left brain imbalanced, and you can see all the areas of electrochemical deadness of the brain. So that's what brain imbalance does to brain physiology. It's measurable, it's provable. This is a type of scan that shows this type of imbalance, and this is called a PET scan. There's other, even more advanced scans called SPECT scans that you can look into to show the neocortex and how brain imbalance begins to affect the electrochemical properties of the brain. The next concept I'll talk about is polarity. So polarity is how seemingly opposite forces work in the world, and I'm going to talk about how they're really, the differences between them are really illusion. That there really is only one ultimate force that's at work in the world, but it kind of has split itself in two, and it works in different ways to really help us to have an experience in the physical world. So polar forces could be looked at as hot and cold, good and evil, young and old, hot and cold. Let's take light and dark as an example. It's only one thing, light and dark. They're not really opposites. There is only light energy. See, it's either present or it's not present, in which case you have darkness. You can't go into a completely lit room and shine darkness into a room. There's no such thing as a darkness flashlight, right? Because darkness is simply the absence of light energy. So there's only light energy. We look at light and dark as two polar opposites, but they're really not. There's really only one thing there. There's only light or its absence. So that's going forward with this section, that's what I want you to keep in mind, that things that we really see as opposites, as really warring against each other, energies that are warring against each other, are really only one thing, or its absence. Scientist Dr. Masaru Emoto, I believe is his name, does experimentations with water crystals, where he exposes simple water to energies, to vibratory energies, to emotions. And he then takes the water molecules and he photographs them under high magnification to see if their structure changes depending on proximity to certain forms of consciousness, like high level of joy or high level of fear or anger, things like that. And this beautifully organized water molecule crystal that you see here formed when the scientists placed water in the presence of high joy and love within certain individuals. So it became ordered. And this brings us to the first polarity. Okay, the first polarity is that which brings order and is the good emotion. We only basically have two emotional polarities. Every other feeling that you could possibly feel is an extension of one of these two basic polar emotional forces at work in the world. So the first one is that which makes us feel good, and it's that which brings order. And it is the energy of love, the polarity of love. And giving an idea of what I mean by the love polarity, the love energy, going forward throughout this presentation, it is not this Hollywood or romance novel idea of love. It is the expansive force of consciousness. If you look at the images here, it's individuals that have opened themselves up to what is and are in harmony with that which is, with truth, and with understanding and knowledge and light. And consciousness and love is that aspect of consciousness, the expansive aspect of consciousness, that which flowers and does this and opens us up to that which is. That's what love really is. Okay? Its polar opposite is the opposite of the energy that makes us feel good and which brings order. This is the energy that makes us feel bad when we experience it and which brings to our experience chaos and disorder and disarray and pain and suffering. And it's interesting that this scientist, Emoto, took water, the same water that he had just previously exposed to a high vibratory energy of consciousness and love and joy, and he then exposed it to people totally in shut down consciousness, fighting amongst themselves, in fear and anger, and just being generally nasty to each other. And this is what the same water ended up looking like. The crystalline structure completely broke down, and there was just chaos in the structure of the water. And it shows you that our emotions and what we think and what we do have an effect on the physical world. The external reality is a reflection of what's really going on inside of us. So this is water that's been exposed to the negative emotional polarity. And that emotional polarity is fear. Fear is the opposite polarity of love. It is the absence of love to varying degrees. And this is the force, this is the polarity that brings disorder into our experience. It brings chaos when it arrives within us. It can never create order. Love is the polarity that brings order. Fear is the polarity that brings chaos. This is the energy that shuts consciousness down. Like love does this and it opens it up, fear does this and it closes it down and it keeps it suppressed. Okay? The next concept I'm going to introduce is magic versus sorcery. These are very real forces. These are very real energies that are being used all around us at all times in the world. And they're very real, but they're quite different from the Hollywood interpretation or definition. A real magician or sorcerer isn't, casting lightning bolts from his fingertips, but he is using forces at work in the world to create what he wishes to create. And here's the definition of magic. This is what magic actually is in the real world. Magic is a science. It's a science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the will. Now that's a very important term there at the end. Will with a capital W. Okay? Whole books, whole volumes have pretty much been written about what that means. And this does not mean the practitioner's egoic will, my desire, what I want to see happen, what I want to see done. This is the will of the energy of creation. It is the will of love. It is the will of that polar force that wants to create order, the divine intelligence inherent in creation, in the energy of creation. Now, you can call that whatever you want. I have no problem calling that God. I have no problem calling that the divine. This is the divine will. But you could think of it however you wish to think of it. So that's what magic is. The science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the will, capital W, the divine will. Let thy will be done, not my egoic will. Okay? Magic's goal is the state of non-dualism. We talked about this before. This is the state of dominion, the state of not being able to be torn apart internally. This is the state of as you think, so you feel, and so you act. You are non-dual. You are one within. Your three aspects of your consciousness are one and cannot be torn apart. As you think, so you feel, so you act. That is magic's goal. A true magician is trying to bring the state of non-dualism into being, not only within himself, but with anyone else that he may have the ability to influence and inspire. And the process of this, of a magician's process to create the state of non-dualism is known as alchemy. And alchemy is not this medieval concept of turning actual metals, base metals, into gold. This is an allegory. This is a symbolic allegory of helping to raise base consciousness into solar consciousness, into divine consciousness, non-dual consciousness, harmonic with the resonant energy of love, of order, of a unified brain, the unified male and female energies. So that's what an alchemist is really trying to do. He is attempting to inspire others and be an influence for them to raise their consciousness up to a higher level. That's what the process of alchemy is. And that's a magician's vehicle for doing his work to accomplish non-dualism. The opposite of magic is sorcery. And as you see here, the definition is almost identical. Sorcery is the science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the will. And you'll notice that the will is no longer capitalized, lowercase w, okay, because this form of will is not the capital W will. It is not the divine energy. It is not the divine aspect of creation, the divine will. This is the sorcerer's own egoic desires, what I want to accomplish for my ends. Let not thy will be done, let my will be done. So sorcery also has a goal, and what it is trying to create and bring into the world is the state of opposition. Opposition is the state when polar forces are at war with each other and there is struggle, there is conflict, there is suffering, there is chaos. Moreover, it means that sorcery wants to create, and a sorcerer wishes to create an opposition within an individual. This is the opposition that takes place within us. We aren't unified in the way we think, feel, and act. We may think a certain way or feel a certain way about something, and yet we do something that's in opposition to that. So we're torn apart from within. The three aspects of our consciousness are not unified as one. They are torn apart. So in that aspect, the person is in internal opposition, or they are crucified within themselves. It could be seen as. So this is, in one sentence, the main problem that humanity collectively faces. A small cabal of evil sorcerers control our whole planet by manipulating the consciousness of its people into a vibration of fear. We talked about what sorcery and magic were in part 1. Sorcerers use illusion and manipulation against people to try to create opposition within the self and opposition in the world and chaos. So there's a group of these people who understand how consciousness works, and they're using that knowledge against the bulk of humanity to control their consciousness by controlling the mind, and they're manipulating their consciousness into a vibrational energy of fear. With that, only chaos and evil can be created outwardly into the world. So that's the root problem that we all face. That's what's actually occurring here. That's what we're falling victim to. Many have seen this image, the pyramid of manipulation, the hierarchical and compartmentalized structure through which those in the know, those who have the knowledge of how human consciousness works and are using it as a weapon against the masses, how they run this top-down pyramid scheme. Up here you see the top of the pyramid, the pinnacle, the summit, where the knowledge is at. Those in the know, those with the knowledge, those who are illuminated into this knowledge of consciousness, can be seen at being at the summit or at the top of a pyramid, and then all different aspects of society are controlled from the top down through a hierarchical, regimented, compartmentalized system. Those who are down here have very little knowledge of how things really work and how they're really structured. They just go along to get along. They do their job. They don't really consider the wider implications of what they're involved in and what they do. And yet, they're being used as pawns in a game, in a manipulation game, to actually create more and more compartmentalized and centralized control of everything and everyone. And you can look at this as simply a structure of knowledge. Knowledge is concentrated at higher and higher levels as you get closer to the top of this pyramid, and there is very little knowledge about how things really work down here. These are just puppets whose strings are being pulled to accomplish the goals and the agenda of those at higher levels of knowledge. These sorcerers of consciousness, as I'll call them, are occult practitioners. They use the knowledge and methodologies of occultism to accomplish their agenda. Now, the word occult is very misunderstood. I want to make it very clear that I am not speaking out against or condemning all types of occultism. Occultism is a body of knowledge that is not generally understood or known about. It is simply knowledge. It's a tool to be used by the practitioner. And what we need to understand is, just because it's occult does not mean that it is evil. It is simply information about how consciousness works, about how we work. And it is known by some and not known by others. So as a tool, you could look at it like any other tool. For example, a hammer. You would not consider a hammer as good or evil. A hammer simply is a hammer. It is a tool. It is what the wielder of the tool does with it that makes it good or evil, that makes it being used for good or evil. So I could take a hammer and I could go out onto the street and strike the first person, bystander, on the street that I see and kill them, which would be a completely sadistic, evil act. That doesn't make the hammer evil. That makes my intent for wielding the hammer evil. I could take that same hammer and go and use it to build a shelter for a homeless individual, and I would have put an act of goodness forward into the world. So it isn't the tool itself, that's good or evil. It's the consciousness of the individual that is wielding the tool. And that's what the occult is. It is simply a tool. It is a body of knowledge. And when we get into the word, you look at the word occult, it comes from the same root as the word ocular, meaning related to the eye or related to vision. And that is exactly what the word occult means. The word occult simply means hidden. That which is hidden from sight, hidden from everyday availability or sight. We cannot perceive it because it is cloaked, it is veiled. That is what occult is. All occultism simply means hidden knowledge. Researcher Judith Moriarty made this statement: the greatest conspiracies are not actually hidden. They are just fragmented into different pieces like a puzzle right before our eyes. So this conspiracy that I'll be talking about, this global hegemony of control, this global manipulation scheme, is right in our face, and we can't see it, most of us. It is just beyond the limits of ordinary perception because it is occult knowledge that most people have very little, if any, awareness of. So it's fragmented into different pieces, but it's right in front of us in plain sight, hidden in plain sight, so to speak. Woodrow Wilson described this manipulation. He said that we have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by the conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men. And you would think that an individual like this would understand how the government had come to be structured. Theodore Roosevelt made this statement: behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government, owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. Former president making this statement. You would think, again, that someone like this has some knowledge of how things are really structured in the power centers of the world. And he's telling you right there, out in the open, that there is an invisible government that owes no allegiance to the people. Now, the body of knowledge that these sorcerers have available to them, where it is derived from, is what many researchers have called the mystery traditions. The mystery traditions of consciousness. Again, it is not to say that this body of knowledge in and of itself is evil. The sorcerers that are doing this work of manipulation, this great work to hypnotize and enslave humanity, they are the inheritors and the perverters of this body of knowledge. It is not theirs, it does not belong to them. They happen to come into contact with it through their, perhaps, bloodlines, their involvements, okay? And they are taking this awareness, this knowledge of how the human consciousness works and how it can be influenced, and they're using it for their own ego-identified worldview and benefit. So they're the inheritors of this knowledge, and they're the perverters of this knowledge. They're using it in a perverted, irresponsible fashion to serve their own egoic will. And this is the ancient secret society networks all throughout the world that have their roots back as far as ancient Egypt and Babylon and even farther back. They had this body of knowledge. They continue in many ways to preserve this body of knowledge. Some of them for a positive purpose, some for a negative purpose. So it isn't any one given secret society that's orchestrating and controlling it all. There are very responsible and good-hearted individuals in these groups, and there are very dark-hearted, manipulating individuals in these groups. It is simply that the body of knowledge about human consciousness, that it's called the mystery traditions because it dates so far into human antiquity, we don't really know when it was codified and came into its existence as we understand it. But it is the knowledge of how human beings operate. You know, our physiology, our emotional makeup, our psychology, etc. How the human psyche works. And that is who is really controlling the whole game from behind the scenes, are the people who have this information, have had it for thousands of years, and are using it in a completely perverted way to manipulate people for their own egoic benefit. So that's clear. That's crucial to keep in mind, and to keep it clear that, again, it is not the knowledge of the mystery traditions or the mystery traditions themselves that is evil. It is how imbalanced consciousnesses are using that knowledge. And of course, if we look at the levels of consciousness as they are as they manifest in the physical world. We understand that there is one way that manipulators, people who are attempting to manipulate consciousness so that they come out on top and other people suffer as a result, they have to attack really one aspect of the individual. And it's ultimately all about mind control. Because if we look at this structure, spirit, mind, and body, this level is the physical world level. Above that, linked with it, is the mind. And above that is spirit, is all-encompassing pure being, pure consciousness. If you're going to have a true connection in your physical manifestation to the spirit, that connection is this layer, the mind layer. Okay? So if the mind is in good health, if the mind is in balance, if the mind is not under manipulation and control, there will be a powerful connection between body and spirit. If it is not in good state, if it is in disarray, if you do not understand the nature of the mind and the nature of your own psyche and psychological makeup, then it is very easy to sever this connection between body and spirit once the mind is under control, externally controlled. So you look at it this way. The body could be seen as the male principle, the blade, or the yang energy. Conversely, the spirit is the opposite aspect, the opposite essence. It is that which is not physical. It's the yin, or the feminine aspect. See, the body rises up to meet the spirit, and the spirit descends to meet the body. So they meet at this realm. This is where body and spirit meet, and they mingle in the realm of mind. So the blade and the chalice combined could be seen to represent mind, and it's a symbol that we've all seen. It's the Star of David, or the Seal of Solomon, as it has been called. It's the seal of body and spirit coming together at the layer of mind. And it is the solar energy combined with the lunar energy to create Sol and Mon, sun and moon, the seal of Solomon. So keep in mind, that is the whole dynamic that sorcerers are after. They want to control this level. So this level would be very difficult to control physically. You would need a lot of physical force to get it done. You control this level, people will police themselves. They will mind control themselves, essentially, through public opinion and through indoctrination down to generation upon generation. The control that they're after is in this level, and if they control the mind, they de-link the body from the spirit. And that's the whole game that they're after. That's the whole thing that they want to perpetrate. Mind control. So this whole next section of the presentation is going to be about methodologies of mind control, consciousness control, how to control what you think, how you feel, and how you act. Okay, the methods of manipulation that are employed against us, members of the human species, by people who have this occultic knowledge and use it for their own egoic benefit. I call this the methods of manipulation, and as many researchers have called it, particularly Michael Tessarian has termed this the war on you, because it's the only real war that's being waged out there. There isn't a war on poverty, there isn't a war on homelessness, there isn't a war on ignorance, there isn't really a war on terrorism. There is only a war on you and your consciousness. That's what the real war that's being waged on earth is really being waged upon. It's the war on your consciousness, on your mind. But here's what the methods of manipulation are that are used against us. Obfuscation, worldview poisoning, the exploitation of primal fears, the divide and conquer technique, indoctrination through what we call the education system, controlled opposition, the financial system, the monetary system, the control of mass media and information, food and medicine, in quotes, the illusion of time, the denial, hassle, ridicule factor, what I coined the DHR factor, religion, specifically religion as binding, which we will get into, the use of symbolism in a mentally subversive way, in a mentally subversive fashion, and what I call chaos sorcery, what other researchers have called the problem, reaction, solution method, or the Hegelian dialectic. So I'll be taking the first 11 of them up to the DHR factor. It will be a small analysis of each one. But then for the last three, religion, symbolism, and chaos sorcery, I consider those the real heavy guns of the war, so to speak. They're the real weapons, the big three of the weapons. And I'll be taking those at length. I'll be going through those specifically.